Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to talk about value sketching. So value sketching is a great way to do some very high contrast painting quickly, but it's also a way to plan out and more efficiently paint really high-end, like go all the way, try hard pieces as well. So it's a really useful skill, and it's something I've mentioned in a few videos, and I've had people ask me, well, what are you talking about? So I thought, well, let's explain what I'm talking about. Because value sketching, excuse me, is something I use all the time, okay? So effectively, I'm going to sort of walk through the theory very quickly, explain kind of options, and then we're going to do it here on little Mr. Chaos Warrior. I love Chaos Warrior models. They're just a classic model, so he'll be fun to test on. He's got a lot of different materials and cloths and stuff, so he'll be good. But first off, I just want to talk about what value sketching is. So zenithal highlighting itself is a method of value sketching, okay? Because it picks out and it assumes the light is coming from right here, and it appropriately highlights everything, kind of picks out the detail. When we look at this guy from below, look at how much darker he looks than when we look at him from the top, where he looks very bright, right? Ignore this little line across the top of his head. I realized he had a real bad mold line as I started filming this, so I just scraped it off. It doesn't matter, we'll cover it up. The value sketch is where we're going to go in and reinforce this, so we then have options. We could, from the point of our value sketch, we can then either go forward, use a quick glaze, and be done. It allows us to paint super high contrast and just finish models in blazingly fast times that will look really good from a distance. They will pop on the tabletop because they will have this high contrast. Okay, and that's what we want in our sort of speed painting. At the same time, if we're going to take the paint job up to, you know, some kind of display level or whatever we're happening to try, if we're trying to paint at our best, we can also use the value sketch to make it a lot easier to then build in later highlights and shadows and stuff like that. So no matter where we're going, speed paint or display paint, it's a useful exercise, and it can expedite greatly your entire experience. So, what we're going to do our initial value sketch here is we're going to use some Daler-Rowney FW ink. This is white and Payne's gray, which is very blue-black. If you don't have these, that's no problem at all. You could use any white paint and any dark black paint or near black paint, like a super dark blue or a super dark purple or whatever. In general, for the highlights, what I like to use for my value sketch is just white, okay? But you can also value sketch on top of colors. So let's say over your zenithal, you lay down a little airbrush color, like we go, bloop, and if this were to be like a little Nurgle Marine, and we kind of just hit this dude with some green to get him ready to go, or Nurgle Marine, sorry, Nurgle Chaos Warrior, then we could then go in with a very bright yellow and do our value sketch with that, and then bring it back with glazes in the same way you're going to see me do here, okay? So you can do it later in the process. You can value sketch multiple times. It's effectively a method of undershading to then help your colors shine through and remain bright. That doesn't rely on slow building of layers, okay? All right, so I think we've probably hammered the theory enough. So let's go ahead and put some paint on this guy here. So what I'm going to do, you can see over here on my palette, I just have a drop of white and a drop of the Payne's gray. Now the reason I'm using Payne's gray, the blue-black, is because this guy is going to turn pinky crimson. So as my shade color, I like to use something that's going to work well and be complementary. So because I'm doing a warm pinky armor, I wanted a cool blue shadow, which is going to make the pink, when I run it over it, or the crimson, I should say, it's going to turn purple. It's going to turn into a deep shadow appropriate for that. If I were to be doing this guy in green, maybe my dark color would be a very brown black, or very black brown, I should say. Or maybe I could do it in a very deep red black, something like a whole red mixed with a little black, to make sure that the shadows are warm compared to my cooler armor or something like that. The point is, by building in that complementary color, you end up getting a lot of extra value out of the later steps. So I'm just going to get a little bit of the white ink on my brush. We're not doing anything too crazy here. As usual, somebody asked me, when do I wick off paint? All the time. This is me painting flesh tone on a model. Okay? All the time we wick off our excess paint. Even when doing something like this. Quick test on the back of the hand. And then what we're going to do, okay, is we're just going to go ahead and put some white paint across the top of his head. And I'm not going to be incredibly delicate about this. Okay, we're going to get the top of his horn here where it's getting hit by the light. We're going to get the top of that horn, basically anywhere where I think there's going to be, I'll pay a little of extra attention to this previous mold line, try to cover that up. We can do some pre-edge highlighting here to help pop that out. So for example, we can get his little eye holes. We'll grab the bottom of those and bring those out. Maybe we'll get the lower part or the side of his mask. We'll get a little bit down here at the bottom. To really pop that out. Okay. Let's see, what else? Oh, fingers are a great thing to get with this. So you want to go ahead and grab those little fingertips. Get the knuckles. So we can grab our little knuckles right here. Not Sonic the Hedgehog's buddy. I don't think Sonic follows Chaos, but who knows? It seems like Chaos would be his enemy, because Chaos control. So, we're going to put a little line across the top of that gauntlet. Let's see, probably one across here. We'll grab the edge of these little strands. I'm not being super delicate, because I don't need to be at this stage. We're going to smooth out inconsistencies later. What I'm basically doing is picking the areas, be they edges, so like you can see down here on this plate, I'll get these edges. And then I'll also then get the whole side of it there. Maybe the top here on these knee plates. Maybe we'll get the foot a little bit. Kind of, if we're wanting to build in a little texture, like we want the shoe to have a little rough texture, okay, this hidden shoe here, then I'll drag my paint in such a direction that I'm creating the texture for later. On his cloak, well, that's pretty easy and obvious. We'll reinforce these lines. I'll thin my white out a little bit here, so I get it really flowing across this big space. Just add a little bit of water to the brush. Just popping it out. Top of the skull. This area should really get that, and we'll get these little rope things. For the fur, I'm not going to worry about it in this video, but what I would honestly do in most cases with this fur before I put anything over it is just dry brush the fur quickly. Here I'll just I'll run the side of my brush across a few elements, but I don't plan to tackle the fur in this one. But so there you go. You can see how we then built up those highlights. Okay, that's step one of establishing our value sketch. We've pushed out certain areas way up into white. So the next thing I'm going to do is just take some of my blue-gray, some of my Payne's gray, and I'm going to deepen some of my shadows up. So like here, where he's falling into shadow, the lower part of this, some of these cracks in the feet, right, where these boots have these big recesses. Maybe toward the top here. Okay, probably the side of his helmet. So this area back into here. Probably the lower area back here on the back. And then we'll reinforce some of the shadows on the cloak. Oops, sorry. Reinforce some of the shadows on the cloak. Okay. So we've deepened shadows and we've brought out highlights. This extra level over the zenithal really helps us later, because now what I can do is I'm going to take some, I happen to have a red here on my palette, a little Bloodfest Crimson. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that Bloodfest Crimson and I'm going to combine it with just a quick drop of some Flow Aid. Okay. So I'm using some War Colors Flow Improver. So that way I get a nice flowing version of this. Okay. So what I have on my palette, I'll show you exactly. There's a little spot of red that looks like that. You can see it's quite watery, quite thin, and quite flowing. As usual, whenever we're dealing with paint that thin and our brush looks like that, all full of paint, we're going to touch and wick off, touch and wick the paint off. Got to get rid of that excess. We're not washing here. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is just put a nice thin glaze over it. By the way, depending on the color, I don't have to necessarily hit the highest white. If I want to leave my white in place, then I could always just carefully do everything except the white. Okay? And leave the white as my actual high highlight, depending on what I did with it. That's fine too. All of those are options. So I'm not going to hit areas I didn't bother to value sketch because I didn't do everything in the idea of time. But you can see how when we run this over the top, it's also going to smooth out some of our inconsistencies. So even though the white was put on somewhat sketchily and I really didn't worry too much about exactly how smooth it was, I didn't try to blend it out. I just tried to make it sharp. What I get is that right there. All right. Now his cloak, we want to be something like on this guy. I want it to be something like a purple. So I've got some purple ink on my palette. You can do this with inks or thinned paint with Flow Improver. The key with it is you want your paint to flow efficiently and smoothly over the surface and spread out nice and evenly, but you don't want to wash because a wash is going to be too weak. It's going to pool. You're not trying to get everywhere. You've already handled your shadows. You don't need that extra work. Okay, you don't need it gathering up in the recesses causing you problems. You're doing a controlled glaze. Let's get the other areas here with pink. And you can see how instantly, oops, I missed that side. There we go. There we go. You can see how instantly we get this high contrast shading that lets everything through. Now again, if I wanted to build this up, I could do another layer of value sketch over here, push in some more shadows. Same principle. I can just keep doing this same thing. So if I really wanted like his face to pop here, I'll come back into my white. And let's say I really want to get these under eyes. And really want to have the bottom of his face. And a little bit on the top of his head right here. And we want to pop this out to really frame him. Okay. Now, I could just stop there. Leave the white, leave those as highlights, just that quick and easy. Or I can go back into my glaze, which is still out here on my palette, and I can do another thin glaze over the top. And you'll notice when I do that, now the intensity of that highlight is stronger. Look how much stronger that pink shows through, because we built that up. All right? If I want to get real saucy, while that's still wet, I go back into my white, and I just kind of wet blend it on the edge there real quick. And I just combine these two things through a quick wet blend to get that effect. And just like that, we've got that wonderful transition. Look at how bright we are here to how dark we are here under the eye area. And what did that take? No time, no real control, right? Like that was, I understand that I've sat here explaining this for 15 minutes, so it's ironic to say that, but that's because I was sitting here explaining it, right? Like that guy on the tabletop is going to look great. He's going to pop. You're going to see that face coming. Okay? Same thing with the cloak. With a surface like this, I'm actually going to use a slightly bigger brush. So when we have something like the cloak, and where I've got an ink, I'll just get a little tiny bit of flow aid there into my brush just to make sure that ink is going to move normally. And thin it out just a little. Because we don't want to use an ink straight out of the bottle, as it were. Inks are really strong as far as pigmentation goes. So again, to show you my palette, there's my purple ink. You can see when I stretch that out about how thick that is. Again, I'm wicking off the excess just like you saw me before. And then I'm just going to go ahead and glaze that purple right over there. Okay? And because I've put in that value sketch first, you know, people often have trouble highlighting purple. Like, I hear that a lot. And the reason is because purple looks like junk. When you start trying to add white and highlight it, it just doesn't work very well. It gets pretty chalky and pretty stark pretty fast. But when you don't have to use anything except a dark purple, because the original ink here is doing all the work over the original undershade is doing all the work under the ink, sorry. And then on the underside of the cloak, where it's more hidden down here, we can even use a slightly more intense ink. So that way it covers that black just a little better, but also is very dark. Okay, so what we get is something that looks like that. And yet again, just as before, if I wanted to reinforce it, I could come into my white, do another quick value sketch of some areas that I really want to get, maybe the edge of the cloak here, maybe that little section, right, whatever. I'm just wet blending it straight in with the ink. Maybe I want to push it out a little farther so I get some thinned white. Take it up like that. Okay. Now obviously that looks really rough and not great, so we let that dry. This is my cheap hairdryer method. It's called blowing on the mini. It's a super high-end technique. You probably haven't heard it in other painters. It's something I created myself. TM me. Okay. So then, but once we can do is once we get more of our purple ink and we thin that down. Okay. Right now that's real rough because we just had the white. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my ink upwards in this direction. And there we go. Just like that. Ooh. Just like that. We're more or less smoothed out. Like, it'll have to dry, obviously. Got a little funky comedina down here still. And we put another glaze over it, and we fall right back in line, and we have a cloak with a wonderful amount of contrast that, again, when you look at it from the tabletop like that, it's going to look great. So by doing those value sketches, working with these high contrast areas becomes so much quicker and easier, okay? So that's what I say when I say value sketches. And I use this a lot. When I'm doing flesh tone, I'll show you another example on a different model. I'm working on a completely different model. Here, the flesh tone on this girl, like when I wanted to pop out, like this is taken to a very high level, this flesh tone. And when I wanted to do it, I started by sketching in dark shadows in here, in this area, down here, right, and under her arm and in the sides of her face and around her eyes. And then I came in with my very bright flesh instead of white and value sketched all the stuff I wanted highlighted, like her nose, her chin, the side of this muscle here, the top of her shoulder, right? So, and then the rest of my time was just the difference between sort of this and that, you know, is how much time I spend glazing and smoothing out the transitions and stuff like that. And if what we're going for is tabletop quality, if I got 30 Chaos Warriors I want to knock out, like, I'm good with that as armor. I think that looks fine for my army, right? And I can then move on to other stuff. I can do work on the fur, get my weapons, and I can get through these guys quickly and have a unit that I think is still going to look eye-catching and interesting on the tabletop without being incredibly time-consuming to slowly build up layers of things or to have harsh transitions. You can see now that purple dried. We can see how that looks in there. Again, for something like an army, I think that's great, but it also gives us the basis that if we want to keep working it up higher, we can. So there you go. That's value sketching. I hope that's useful to you. I hope now that it'll be nice that I have this video, so if I mention it in a future video and somebody has a question, I can always refer them back to this. But I hope that this gives you some ideas for things you could do with your own armies, or help you could do to maybe knock out a bunch of that gray plastic we all have sitting around. Maybe there's an army you've wanted to do for a while, but you thought, oh, gosh, you know, doing a bunch of layering transitions on that's going to take forever. Well, here we go. Maybe we can get that painted up with a technique like this. So I hope you give it a try. I hope you enjoy it. If you like this, go ahead and give it a like. Subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. Share this with anybody if you think they would enjoy it. Sharing is the nicest thing you can do and deeply appreciated. If you have suggestions for future hobby cheating topics you'd like to see, go ahead and drop them down in the comments. Always appreciate suggestions. Love when we can build episodes around what people directly ask for, because then I know there's an audience of at least one. But always happy to help. As always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.